Well, hello. It's another day and it's a new show, and we appreciate you tuning in to watch us today. We're going to spend most of this half hour talking about preparation. And what I'm talking about there is the economy. You can watch liberal news media and you can think that everything is going to be great and wonderful going forward. You can watch conservative media and you can say it's going bad. You can watch the president say, if Republicans get elected, it's going to get worse. Right. So what is going on here? Right. Well, let me side note this by saying that during the worst of times in our economy, guess who makes a lot of money? Politicians. The military-industrial complex. So I just want to put that out there. When you see politicians talking on television, you need to ask yourself, how are they making money? Whether, we send the military-industrial complex, for example, we are spending a lot of time in Ukraine right now, and we're sending money unaccounted for. Somebody's getting rich off of that.
That's right.
And we're sending ammo over there. So we're depleting our stores. So what happens? Well, Congress says, you know what? We need to resupply our military. Right. So everybody in Congress knows that we're going to go ahead and let defense contracts out to replenish our supplies and the insider trade. So they make a ton of money. So bad times are good for Congress, and you need to keep an eye open there and think twice about why they're voting for certain issues or they're funding certain issues.
Well, and you need to ask yourself, why is the media not telling us this? Why are they not investigating these politicians and finding out what they're doing with the money that we have to give them? Right? Because if you don't pay your taxes, you either get fined or go to jail. And now that we have another 87,000 IRS agents, I guarantee you they're going to squeeze your lemon. And they're going to get what they want from you. And so we are not being told the truth. The media is covering this up. They are minimizing a very disastrous future. And they're not telling us. They're not telling us that it's getting worse because they don't want it to look unfavorable to the candidates, because the candidates pay them basically to do what they're doing.
If you follow the news these days, in particular, the president, he stands up in front of the American people and says, if Republicans get elected, it's going to be worse. Well, why is he doing that?
Right.
He is doing that because it's going to get worse.
Right.
Regardless, if they elected all Democrats and they still held the majority in both houses, right, it's going to get worse. What they're trying to do is they're trying to spin the story, the political narrative, in advance, so that 6 months from now, when we've got 6% unemployment or 7% unemployment, and everybody's 401s have gone into the tank, and we don't have any money in our strategic petroleum reserve, and gas is $5 a gallon, and all these people are out of work, and the government is running out of money to pay people to survive. He wants to blame all that on Republicans.
Right. Just because the ship is going down and there's a hole in the ship doesn't mean that the next guy who starts driving that ship is at fault. The reason that it's all in the position that it's in is primarily because when Biden came into office, he stopped our energy production and he shut off our pipelines. And immediately what happened is that he threw our nation into a crisis. And that one policy alone has created a major financial upheaval for us and the rest of the world. That, along with his foreign policies that have drawn us into all kinds of places. I'd like to know how many checks we've written, overseas to Ukraine and everybody else, because it's, the thing that we're going to do. And so as a result of that, and then all of the spending, the giving away free checks and all this stuff, it's just caused everything to be in a very volatile place, right?
You have to wonder why one party or the other favors war when they're otherwise in favor of domestically, peace, love, hand out the free checks, but we want to have a war over there and we totally support it. You have to ask yourself those kind of questions.
Yeah. Well, as a pastor, I tell people, you got to get ready for the future. Don't be out here spending wildly. Don't be out here taking extravagant vacations. Now is the time to protect your household. Make sure that you have your house in order. Make sure that you are tithing and plugged into your community of faith. Make sure that you are taking care of your business. Get yourself out of debt and do whatever you can to live a very simple life in this state.
What's going to happen here is the Fed is going to continue to raise rates. When it raises rates, everybody else raises rates. So, when I'm talking about credit cards and mortgages, consumer loans, and the like. And the purpose of raising the rates is to combat inflation, but they're not doing it fast enough.
Right.
So we have a severe problem with that. And the other thing that interest rates affect that people don't think about is business. And this is something I've learned fairly recently. You probably wouldn't know this, but in years gone by, back to the elder statesman role again, there were investment grade bonds and there were junk bonds. And investment grade bonds had the lowest interest rates for the best financially stable businesses in the United States. And there was a big flip-flop in the 80s and 90s, and we got into what's called junk bonds. And virtually today, almost the entire business community, whether it's small business or big business, reinvests in junk bonds. So they reinvest to do research and development. They do it because maybe they were leveraged or they borrowed money to grow the company or to pay employees. And this has been going for like 10 or 12 years now. The interest rates were extremely low. So as these businesses had to refinance their businesses every 2 or 3 years, 2 to 5 years, short-term bonds, U.S. Treasuries, you can see those on the news ticker. They have, 2-year interest rate. Well, it was basically zero. So when they financed their businesses, it didn't cost them anything to refinance. They just extended it for another 2 years. Well, now the interest rates have doubled. The specific example I'll give you is that 2 years ago, the interest rate on junk bonds was 4%. Now it's 8%.
All right, so to the common man, to those of us who need things simplified,
sure,
I being one of them. So how does this affect my household income and my bottom line?
Yeah, well, what's going to happen is the businesses have got to either pass on the increase in their expenses to consumers through the products or services that they produce, or they're going to go bankrupt because people will stop using the products or the services. And if they go bankrupt, of course, we're going to have unemployment, right? People are going to be put out of work. And if they don't go bankrupt, the rest of us are going to suffer inflation. This is part of that inflation equation, and we're all going to pay more for everything.
Right. And so you have record numbers of restaurants and places like this who have to decide, do I pay my employees or do I pay my rent? Right? And so they're in a very difficult place. And so when you walk into a restaurant and there aren't enough servers and the food cost is higher, what you need to recognize is this is a result of inflation. They're telling you it doesn't exist. It does. So what can we do about that?
Well, you have, my version, my wife's version, we've been doing this for, I'd say 30 or 40 years now, is live debt free. Now, clearly, if you buy a house, you're going to have a mortgage.
Right.
Clearly, if you do buy a car, you're unlikely to pay cash for at least a brand new car. I would say get the used car. That's in good shape. But you have to figure out what is essential in your budget and what turns out to be just excess expenses. We have had maybe 5 or 6 cars our entire life, our marriage together, 46 years. We buy cars and we keep them for 18 or 20 years. We don't have any payments on them. We do a little maintenance and upkeep on them, but we keep them running. And in contrast, You have people who buy a new car every 2 years or lease a new car every 2 years. And in this day and age, when automobiles are $50 or $60 or $70,000, you're taking out a loan on a car for 7 or 8 years at $800, $1,000 a month. And people are paying as much for cars as they're paying for rent.
Right.
In some cases.
Right.
And why would you do that? And if you're going to lose your job, guess what? You're going to be one of those homeless people living in Los Angeles or someplace because you didn't prioritize. Another one, so to us, those are two important things.
Right.
Is like the automobile and the rent or the mortgage. What people, again, probably don't consider in general is that our economy is 70% driven by consumers buying stuff. Buying goods and services. Of that, 20% is home ownership. And guess what happened to home ownership these last 3 or 4 months since interest rates have gone up? It cratered. Absolutely cratered. The interest rate on a new home now is running close to 7%. That's going to go higher. People stopped buying homes. And when the interest rates were low, there was a big rush because we don't have enough houses in this country. So more people were looking at fewer houses, and the value of the houses was going like this. So you couldn't hardly get an offer in on a home that you wanted to buy before it was somebody else raised their offer on the house. So it raised the value of homes. Well, when the housing market has now cratered, guess what's happened to those assets that people bought? They've gone down. People are losing money in the housing, in their the value of their homes. They're losing it in their 401s. The inflation rate is higher than the wage gains, so people are losing monthly income is less compared to inflation. So they're losing in that fight.
So what Tom is saying to you is that, number one, we have to trust God. Right? We have to do things God's way. The reason He gives us the laws and principles that He gives us is not to hurt us, it's to protect us. And so what does God say? God says, give me 1/10 of your first fruits. So tithing is essential. You want to be sure that you're giving to God what God asks of us, because that provides a covering over us. Secondly, what He's saying is that we don't want to live overextended. We don't want to be living from paycheck to paycheck. We don't want to have lots of debt that's based on our credit cards and car loans and things like that. Get those things paid off. Sell some things if you have to sell some things. And so then the next thing is that be a very smart investor. Take time to make sure you're making a smart investment. Did I summarize what you said pretty good?
You have. I think the hardest part is for people who are going to have to try to figure out what's necessary and what's non-essential. And we're going to talk about that some more in the second half of the program, but we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with you in just a few minutes. Welcome back. I'd like to tie up a loose end before we talk about how it impacts what's going forward, how bad things are going to get for individuals, and give some examples of what individuals I think are doing wrong, or you make the big question mark about how did they get in this situation. But what we got going ahead that's going to make things so miserable, not only in 6 months from now, but for years to get this thing straightened out, was we've got the inflation that has to be brought down. The government way of doing that currently is to have the Fed raise interest rates. That's the only means by which they're attacking that. And what's going to happen is we had a GDP, gross domestic product, that's the total value of all the goods and services put out by Americans in this country. It was negative the last 2 quarters, which said we were in a recession. People go, no, we're not in a recession. And we had positive GDP this time. It was almost entirely based on the narrowing of the trade deficit. So what does that mean practically? It means that, we buy a lot of cheap stuff from China and we sell our stuff overseas, and there's a difference in the amount of money that comes in and the amount of money that goes out when we buy, right? Well, it shrunk. And because it shrunk, and this is only temporary, our GDP was up because our value was higher than it normally is. Well, that's going to widen again. So we're going to have that's another contributor to not only our recession. We're going to double dip, by the way. Double dip recession. You can look that one up. We're going to have a double dip recession, but we're going to have a global recession as well. The dollar strengthens. Everybody else in the world, for example, to buy oil, they all buy oil using the US dollar as reserve currency. So if the dollar gets stronger against all the other currencies in the world, whether it's the yen in Japan or the Han Seng or or yuan, what happens is when people buy oil, it's more expensive for them to buy it. So their energy costs go up, their GDP of all those countries goes down, and we end up with a global recession where nobody can buy anything. It's going to be just a nightmare.
Right.
So that's my conclusion, that I follow people on TV and business channels. That's how I see it's going to happen. So again, you need to decide what's essential, what's non-essential, pay off your debt, and hunker down.
Right.
So let me give you an example here. I'll give you a couple of brief numbers that might make your eyes glass over slightly, and then talk about a family and where we can just use them as an example and ask some questions. Right here, according to the Washington Post, nearly half of Americans with credit cards today have an outstanding credit card balance of $5,270. Think about that. $5,270 in credit card debt. And what's happening is everybody is 90% of Americans. There's the rich few who don't care what interest rates are and are making lots of money no matter what. But 90% of Americans have spent their savings. They've got new credit cards, and they've used them to increase their debt. They're going to run out of ways to charge things, and what's going to happen is they're suddenly either going to themselves have to declare personal bankruptcy or sell things off later when it's way more painful to do that. And I'm really concerned that the payments that people are making on credit cards they're falling farther and farther and farther behind. So they need to do something about that. And I encourage you to take a hard look at your budget and finances. So specifically, here's an example. This was in a USA Today article, just to let you know I'm not checking out all the conservative stuff.
Right.
And this is an attempt to elicit, in my mind, the sympathy vote for everyday Americans. But I look at this example, and I have to ask questions.
Right. Well, right. So when you start talking to these people about what they're really doing with their money, what we start to discover is that we're spending on things that we don't have to have. We don't have to upgrade all the appliances in the kitchen. The ones that we have are working fine. But we, in our mind, our neighbors down the road just got new appliances, so we're going to go get them too, but we really can't afford them, right? Or, my son likes to wear a $150 pair of tennis shoes. Well, maybe he needs to go rake some leaves to get him some $150 tennis shoes, and he'll appreciate them and take care of them a lot longer.
Wow. I just can't imagine.
Right.
It's like if you pay $150 for tennis shoes, how much are you going to spend on your date?
Where's
that money coming from?
The drive-through at Starbucks.
And do you need to have that new little beep beep to drive your girl around and impress her as you take her out to some place you can't afford?
I really think that what we have done is that we have created a culture that is driven by our wants, not our needs. And that's the big problem here is that we want everything and we want it now. And we've got to submit that to the Lord. And we've got to deal with the lust that we have for stuff.
Yeah, there's a little bit of almost, I call it a Stockholm syndrome
Right.
for people, where you get used to having the same provider for
Right.
internet service, or the same provider for a cell phone, or brand loyalty to an automobile, or whatever it might be. And instead of looking to see if you can get better value somewhere else for the same service or material possession, you stay loyal, and you end up spending more, and you end up spending unnecessarily because you feel obligated to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Right. Oh, yeah. Heaven forbid that you go back to a flip phone.
Linda and I, we bought new phones last year. We kept the other phones for almost 6 years before. Again, young people, they go to school and they go, "What phone you got?" "Well, I got the new Super G Max iPhone 14 Plus."
Right.
"Well, I've only got this old iPhone 12, and so there's that pressure that.
Right. 6G is going to do away with phones anyhow. Don't worry about it. Eventually, we won't even have them. We'll just communicate out of our ear or something. Right.
We'll have all this stuff embedded. If you haven't seen that before, they're doing experiments. Or let me embed something in my hand or my wrist. I'll pay for my groceries by swiping my wrist. It's like, well, slit your wrist. Crying out loud, don't swipe it.
Right.
Because you are just going down the wrong road.
So our couple here, we're going to challenge them and the monies that they're paying and the ways that they've gotten themselves in debt. Yeah. What we say is it's time to take a look in the mirror and get honest with yourself.
Yes, it is. Over the last couple of years during COVID lockdown, the government printed a lot of money. Print is a figurative term, but more or less they printed the money, and they handed it out to a lot of people. And a lot of people took that money, the checks we got in the mail a couple times a year, and they put it on their debt, which was a smart thing to do. They paid down their debt, their credit card debt, and they got in a manageable area, and then that money has dried up, or is drying up. There's still a lot of it to be dispersed, but it's not specifically going directly to individuals. So this couple here, they both have jobs. They paid down their debt, and he works as a financial analyst for a hospital. She works for the federal government. So they got 2 jobs, and I think they have 4 kids. So they pay it down, but now, when the money runs out, they've taken out 2 credit cards and maxed them out. So now they've run up this massive amount of debt, and where the financial analyst says, "I can't stop feeding my family. I can't stop paying utilities." So unfortunately, things like credit cards may have to go past due, which means the late fees kick in and the interest doubles. No kidding, Charlie. I mean, that's the way it works. Yeah. And the next thing you know, we're way behind and there's no way to catch up. This is what you have to think about. If you're charging right now to keep up with the neighbors next door, or to keep buying the premium food, or to pay for your late model automobile, or the one place you're stuck is maybe a variable interest loan on a mortgage. You're kind of stuck there.
Well, I mean, if it's the stuff that it's buying new clothes, and sometimes we just need to wear what we have and make do.
Keep the old phone.
Yeah.
Keep the old TV set. Yeah. Find a cheaper phone plan.
Yeah.
Find a cheaper internet plan.
You know what? I go back to my grandmother, who used to cook on a wood stove in the hills of Virginia.
Cast iron?
Cast iron. She saved the bacon grease. She poured that bacon grease off in a little tin can and had a little filter on top of it. And next morning's breakfast was, what do we call it? Repurposed bacon grease.
Reimagined.
It was just as good as the first one. So, the reality is there's a lot of ways that we can save, but we don't, because we're consumers. We love our stuff. That $5 cup of coffee that you think you have to have from Starbucks, you could probably have 100 cups of coffee for that $5 you spend every morning.
A lot of people have their own little syntaxes, don't they?
We do.
Cigarettes and alcohol and lottery tickets, and they spend this money, and they maybe should be saving it and paying down their debt. It's still not too late. It's because we haven't had the large increase in unemployment yet.
Right.
People still have jobs. People are still working. So you need to pay down that debt. But this is just crazy that a couple with 2 jobs, and they sound like decent jobs.
Right, right.
Can't figure, and this is the important part that everybody needs to remember. Late fees kick in when you don't make the payments. Interest rate doubles as the Fed raises its rate. This is from 3 to 3.75% or whatever. Your credit card goes from 18 to 23%. If you've got, think about that. If you've got $5,000 on a line of credit with a credit card, and you pay 20% interest, you're paying $1,000 over the course of that year. Yeah. So you're paying almost $100 a month for absolutely nothing.
Right. And the problem is we don't see it. You know, when we don't see it, you know, we used to pay for cash. You had $100 in your pocket. By the time you spent that $100, you knew it was gone. But now with the plastic, we just keep sticking it in the machine, and it keeps, oh, look, we got more stuff. We can keep doing this. But that's not the way this is going to work. And so what we're trying to do is get yourselves prepared. Start making decisions to conserve. You know, it's not wrong to save and pay things down instead of buy more stuff. We're headed into the Christmas season, and this may be that year where it's a much more conservative holiday rather than splurging and buying a bunch of stuff on credit.
You got to live within your means, and I don't think a lot of people understand what living within your means actually means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can go out and buy the biggest house that you can afford for the income you've got.
Right.
Buy a smaller house.
Yeah.
And take the difference in the money you would have spent and put it in a savings account or in the market or someplace where you're preparing 45 years later, 40 years, 30 years, whatever, for your retirement, so that you don't have to depend on the government for that Social Security check that, by the way, in the next 8 years or so is going to end up getting cut. So you've just got to think about that. But here, back to this couple. When they opened the 2 credit cards and maxed them out, what they didn't consider is that, look at this, credit card debt is rising at the fastest rate in more than 20 years. 20 years. So
for some of us, it's time to cut them up, right?
Consolidate, pay it down, cut them up, sell, whatever you need to do. Please do it. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again next time.